Sarah adjusted the strap of her duffel bag, her heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The wrought iron gates of Graceland loomed ahead, intricate and imposing, an immediate reminder of the world she was about to step into. It wasn't just a mansion, it was a legend. Home to Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, and Sarah, a fresh-faced 19-year-old from a small farm in Kentucky, was about to become one of his stable hands. She'd heard the whispers, of course. Everyone had, not just about Elvis's music or his movies, but about his horses. They said he treated them better than some people, better than anyone. Sarah, who'd grown up mucking stalls and tending to livestock, found the idea both intriguing and slightly absurd. How much better could a horse possibly be treated? A good horse was a well-fed, healthy horse with a clean stall, but the stories went further. Custom-built barns with air conditioning, specialized diets, round-the-clock vets, and even diamond-studded halters for special occasions. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale. A security guard, stern-faced, but with surprisingly kind eyes, waved her through. "You must be Sarah," he said, checking her name off a clipboard. "Welcome to Graceland, Vernon Presley. Elvis's father is expecting you at the stables." The drive up the curving driveway was a blur of meticulously manicured lawns and stately trees. The mansion itself, grand and white-columned, seemed to hum with an unseen energy, as if the echoes of music and laughter still vibrated in the air. But Sarah's attention was drawn past the house to a sprawling complex nestled deeper into the property, half hidden by a grove of ancient oaks. The stables, they weren't just stables. They were equestrian palaces. As she got closer, Sarah could make out the impeccable white fencing, the pristine turnout paddocks, and the long, low buildings constructed of beautiful wood and stone. Even from a distance, the air smelled not of typical barnyard, but of fresh hay, polished leather, and a faint, sweet scent she couldn't quite place. Perhaps expensive horse shampoo. Vernon Presley, a man who looked tired but carried an undeniable air of quiet authority, met her at the stable door. He was older than she'd expected, his face etched with lines of worry and responsibility, but his handshake was firm. "Sarah, good to have you. We run a tight ship here. These horses, they mean the world to Elvis." His gaze held a depth that suggested a story far beyond simple ownership. He led her inside and Sarah's jaw nearly dropped. This wasn't just a barn. It was a five-star hotel for horses. The aisle was wide and spotless, polished to a gleam. Each stall was enormous, bedded with thick, clean straw, and equipped with automatic waterers and feeders that dispensed precise amounts of feed. The walls were painted a calming cream, and soft, indirect lighting cast a gentle glow. There wasn't a speck of dirt or a misplaced piece of tack anywhere. "This is Memphis," Vernon said, gesturing to a magnificent chestnut American quarter horse who peered over his stall door, his eyes intelligent and curious. "Got a gentle soul, that one." Memphis snickered softly, nudging Sarah's outstretched hand with his velvet muzzle. He seemed to radiate a calm confidence, completely at ease in his luxurious surroundings. As Vernon continued the tour, pointing out the climate control systems, the specialized farrier station, the heated wash stalls, and the fully equipped veterinary clinic on site, Sarah started to understand. This wasn't just about money. It was about an almost obsessive level of care. Every detail had been considered. It was a level of pampering Sarah had never even dreamed of for an animal. Her own family's horses were loved, yes, but they were working animals, not pampered royalty. "You'll learn the routines quickly," Vernon explained, his voice low. "Every horse has their own detailed care plan. Their diets are precise, their exercise schedule strict. We have a full-time vet, a farrier who visits weekly, and trainers who work with them." Connor nodded, trying to absorb it all. It was overwhelming, yet strangely compelling. There was an atmosphere of peace in the stables, an almost sacred quiet that contrasted sharply with the image of the roaring king she held in her mind. Just then a door at the far end of the stable opened and a figure stepped out. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, with hair as black as midnight and a presence that filled the space. It was Elvis. He wasn't wearing a sequined jumpsuit or a flamboyant stage outfit. Instead, he was in simple jeans, a worn t-shirt, and cowboy boots, looking less like a superstar and more like a man who genuinely belonged in a stable. His eyes, though, were what caught her. They were a startling blue, deep-set, and incredibly intense, darting around the stable, taking everything in. He stopped, his gaze falling on Memphis. A soft smile, genuine and unforced, spread across his face as he reached out a hand to stroke the horse's muzzle. Memphis pressed into the touch, a deep sigh, rumbling in his chest. In that moment, Sarah saw something profound. It wasn't the king on stage commanding thousands. It was just a man, quietly connecting with an animal. There was an almost desperate tenderness in his touch, a yearning she couldn't quite place. Elvis looked up, then his blue eyes meeting Sarah's. For a fleeting second, she felt completely exposed, as if he could see right through her. His expression was unreadable, a mix of weariness, curiosity, and something else, something vulnerable she couldn't name. He gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of her presence, before turning back to Memphis, his hand still resting on the horse's soft coat. Vernon cleared his throat. "Elvis, this is Sarah, our new stablehand." Elvis turned fully now, a more public smile gracing his lips. "Welcome, Sarah. Glad to have you." His voice was a low rumble, familiar from countless records, but softer, more intimate here in the quiet of the stable. "You'll find these horses are good company." He didn't say much more, but his eyes lingered on her for another moment, as if assessing her, searching for something. Then, with another gentle pat to Memphis, he disappeared back into the room. He'd emerged from leaving Sarah standing there, the scent of hay and expressive horse chandelier. She had a feeling the answer was going to be far more complex than diamond-studded halters. The first few days at Graceland were a whirlwind for Sarah. She quickly fell into the rhythm of the stables, a routine that was both demanding and astonishingly precise. Her previous experience on a small Kentucky farm had taught her diligence, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer level of detail and dedication. Her day began before dawn. Alongside the other stable hands, a small, tight-knit crew, mostly older men who had been with Elvis for years and guarded the horses with a quiet reverence. Each horse, Sarah learned, had its own meticulously charted diet, sometimes down to the ounce. Specialized grain mixes, premium hays, and an array of supplements filled the feed room, organized like a high-end pharmacy. There were supplements for joint health, for coat shine, for digestion, every need anticipated, every comfort provided. "You won't find a single colic here if we can help it," a grizzled stable hand named Hank explained to her on her second morning, gesturing to the gleaming stainless steel buckets. "And if we do, the doc's here faster than Elvis can sing 'Hound Dog.'" The morning mucking out was a testament to the stable's immaculate standards. Stalls were stripped bare daily, not just picked, and fresh, deep straw was laid down. The air quality was constantly monitored, and even the temperature inside the barn was controlled year-round. Sarah had never seen such concern for an animal's environment. After feeding and cleaning, it was exercise time. The horses, all magnificent specimens, were either ridden in the large indoor arena, turned out in their sprawling, impeccably maintained paddocks, or lunged in the round pen. Trainers were on site every day working with the horses, ensuring they were not just physically fit but mentally stimulated. Sarah watched, fascinated, as a sleek Arabian named Rising Sun performed intricate dressage movements, his coat gleaming under the arena lights. The afternoon brought grooming sessions that were more akin to spa treatments. Each horse was curried, brushed, and pampered for an hour or more, their coats glowing, their manes and tails flowing like silk. Sarah, used to a quick brush before a ride, found herself spending an hour on each animal, meticulously picking out every speck of dust, polishing their hooves, and even braiding their manes. The horses seemed to relish the attention, dozing contentedly under her hands. It was during these quiet, intimate moments that Sarah started to truly connect with the horses. Memphis, the chestnut quarter horse she'd met on her first day, was a gentle giant, constantly seeking affection. Domino, a spirited black Frisian, was playful and curious, nudging her pockets for treats. And Rising Sun the Arabian was regal, yet surprisingly sweet, natured, nuzzling her arm as she brushed his silken mane. What struck Sarah most was how incredibly calm and trusting all the horses were. They showed no signs of stress or nervousness. They were secure, loved, and absolutely at peace. It was a remarkable testament to the environment created for them. Elvis himself was a frequent, though often unpredictable presence in the stables. He would sometimes appear late at night, long after everyone else had gone home, and spend hours just walking the aisles, talking softly to the horses, or simply standing in a horse's neck. Sarah, living in the staff quarters on the property, would sometimes catch a glimpse of his silhouette against the stable lights, a lone figure in the quiet dark. During the day, he might pop in, unannounced, sometimes just for a few minutes between studio sessions or meetings, sometimes for longer stretches. He always greeted the horses by name, often with a special word or a scratch behind the ears. He knew their individual quirks, their personalities, their moods. He wasn't just an owner, he was a participant in their lives. One afternoon, Sarah was grooming Memphis, humming softly to herself, when she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Elvis standing there, observing her with his intense blue eyes. He was wearing sunglasses, but she could feel their gaze. "You're doing good work, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper in the vast stable. "Memphis likes you?" Sarah blushed, surprised. "Thank you, Mr. Presley. He's a wonderful horse." Elvis stepped closer, reaching out to gently stroke Memphis's broad forehead. "He is, isn't he? They all are. They got good hearts." He leaned against the stall door, his posture relaxed, almost casual, yet there was an underlying current of exhaustion in his eyes. "You grow up around horses?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. Chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "They deserve it, don't you think?" His eyes met hers, and there was a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, a longing, a vulnerability. "They give you everything. Don't ask for a thing back. Except a little kindness." He paused, then pushed himself off the door. "You ever just sit with them? Really sit?" Sarah nodded. "Sometimes when I was younger, if I was upset, I'd go out to the barn. They always seemed to listen." Elvis's smile was fleeting but genuine. "They do," he said, almost to himself. He stood there for another minute, just looking at Memphis, a faraway look in his eyes. He wasn't Elvis the King in that moment. He was simply a man finding comfort in the presence of a loyal animal. Then, with a sigh, he patted Memphis one last time. "Keep up the good work, Sarah." And just as quietly as he'd appeared, he was gone, leaving Sarah with a lingering scent of horse and a deepening sense of intrigue. These horses weren't just a status symbol, they were something far more profound to Elvis Presley. Question of why continued to grow a quiet hum in the back of her mind. Sarah had settled into her routine, finding a quiet satisfaction in the meticulous care of the Graceland horses. She learned the individual personalities of each animal, the specific commands they responded to, and the little quirks that made them unique. She also became accustomed to Elvis's unpredictable appearances, observing how his mood seemed to lighten the moment he entered the stables, how the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease as he interacted with the horses. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah was leading Domino, the spirited black Frisian, from his paddock back to the barn. Domino was usually a picture of controlled power, but today he seemed a little jumpy, his ears swiveling constantly. Sarah attributed it to the blustery wind that rustled through the oak trees, making shadows dance. As they approached the barn entrance, a delivery truck, unexpectedly loud, rumbled down the service road, blowing its air horn just as it passed. Domino, startled by the sudden noise and movement, let out a terrified snort, rearing up on his hind legs. Sarah, caught off guard, instinctively tightened her grip on the lead rope, pulling against his powerful surge. She managed to hold on, but Domino twisted his hooves, scrabbling, and in his panic he accidentally struck her arm with his knee. A sharp pain shot through her, and she nearly lost her footing, but she held firm, not wanting to let the valuable horse bolt. "Whoa, Domino. Easy, boy, easy," she murmured, trying to keep her voice calm despite the throbbing in her arm. Domino continued to prance nervously, eyes wide, but Sarah's steady presence eventually began to calm him. Just then, a blur of motion appeared from the side door of the stables. Elvis. He must have been inside, perhaps enjoying a quiet moment, and heard the commotion. His face, usually a mask of composure in public, was etched with immediate alarm. "What happened?" he practically barked, his blue eyes instantly assessing the situation. He saw Sarah, pale and clutching her arm, and Domino still agitated but now responding to her soft reassurances. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, he moved quickly and deliberately, his movements surprisingly fluid for such a large man. He didn't grab Domino's lead rope from Sarah. Instead, he stepped calmly between her and the horse, placing himself squarely in Domino's line of sight. "Hey, big fella," he said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing cadence. "It's all right, boy, just a silly truck. No harm done." He extended a hand, palm open, toward Domino's nose, his movements slow and deliberate, projecting absolute calm. Domino, still trembling, hesitantly lowered his head. He sniffed Elvis's hand, then nudged it, a soft wicker escaping his nostrils. Elvis stroked the Frisian's neck, his touch firm yet incredibly gentle. "That's it, boy. Good fella? Good boy." As Elvis worked to calm the horse, his attention flickered to Sarah. "You okay, Sarah?" His brow was furrowed with concern. "Did he get you?" "My arm," she managed, wincing. "Just a knock. I think I held him." Elvis nodded approvingly at her last words, a look of genuine respect in his eyes for her quick thinking and tenacity. He continued to soothe Domino, talking softly, until the magnificent horse finally relaxed, dropping his head and letting out a deep sigh. Only when Domino was completely calm and placid did Elvis turn his full attention to Sarah. "Let's see that arm," he said, his voice now gentle but firm. Carefully took her arm, his fingers lightly probing the bruised area. "Looks like you took a good hit. We need to get some ice on that, Hank," he called out, his voice carrying through the stable. "Get the doc on the line." Sarah had a knock. Hank, along with a couple of other stable hands, rushed over their faces, concerned. Within minutes, the stable's resident vet, Dr. Miller, was on her way, and Sarah was ushered into a small, comfortable office near the clinic, an ice pack being applied to her arm. Elvis didn't leave. He sat there pulling up a chair, his earlier alarm replaced by a quiet, watchful concern. He wasn't the distant superstar anymore. He was a worried employer, a genuine caretaker. He asked her specific questions about how it happened, making sure she hadn't hit her head, checking her pupils. He even helped steady the ice pack. "That's a good bruise you're going to have, Sarah," he said, his eyes serious. "But you handled him well. Most folks would have let him go. That's a lot of horse to hold." "I wasn't going to let him get hurt, sir," Sarah replied, a little surprised by his continued presence. Elvis nodded slowly. "That's the spirit we need here. Their safety, their comfort. It's paramount." He paused, then looked directly at her. "You okay to keep working? No pressure if you need to rest?" "I'm fine, sir. Just a bit sore," Sarah assured him. Pain was still there, but his concern made her feel oddly warm. Dr. Miller arrived moments later, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes. She examined Sarah's arm thoroughly. "Just a deep bruise, Elvis. No breaks. She's a tough one." She gave Sarah some pain relief and instructions for icing. "Good," Elvis said, relief evident in his voice. As Dr. Miller went to prepare more specific instructions, Elvis stood up. He walked over to the stable door and peered out at Domino, who was now calmly munching hay in his stall, seemingly unaware of the earlier drama. A sigh escaped Elvis, one that seemed to carry the weight of many responsibilities. He turned back to Sarah. "Thank you, Sarah, for your quick thinking and for holding on to Domino. He's a special horse." His eyes lingered on her, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah saw something beyond the public persona, a deep, almost paternal protectiveness for his animals. And for the people who cared for them, it wasn't just about owning magnificent horses. It was about their welfare, their safety, and a profound, unwavering commitment that went beyond typical celebrity whims. Elvis didn't just love his horses. He seemed to need them. And seeing his reaction to Domino's brief fright and to Sarah's injury only deepened the mystery of why. Sarah's arm healed quickly, a purple bruise fading into yellow. A constant reminder of the incident with Domino. The event, however, had done more than just bruise her arm. It had offered a glimpse behind the curtain of Elvis's celebrity, revealing a man deeply, genuinely concerned. The stable staff especially, Hank, seemed to view her with newfound respect. Elvis himself continued his frequent, often unannounced visits to the stables. Sometimes he would watch the horses being worked, offering a quiet comment or a nod of approval to the trainers. Other times he would simply wander the aisles, his presence a calming force. One late afternoon, the sun casting long golden shadows across the paddocks, Sarah was brushing Memphis. The large quarter horse stood patiently, his head low, eyes half closed in contentment. The stable was quiet, most of the other staff having left for the evening. Only Hank was still around finishing up some paperwork in the office. Suddenly, Elvis appeared at Memphis's stall door. He looked tired. His shoulders slumped and the usual spark in his blue eyes seemed dimmed. He was dressed casually in a comfortable tracksuit, clearly not expecting to be seen. He didn't seem to notice Sarah at first, his gaze fixed on Memphis. He entered the stall slowly, deliberately, and leaned against Memphis's powerful flank. He reached out a hand, stroking the horse's neck with a soft, repetitive motion. Memphis, sensing his presence, shifted slightly, nuzzling Elvis's shoulder. "Rough day, boy?" Elvis murmured, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper. "Just one of those days where everyone wants a piece of you and you ain't got enough to give." Sarah froze, brush in hand. She felt like an intruder privy to a moment deeply personal. She considered slipping away, but something held her rooted to the spot. She'd never seen him like this. Not the king, not the performer, but a weary man, seeking solace. He continued to stroke Memphis, his eyes distant. They don't understand, do they? They think it's all easy, all bright lights and cheers. They don't see the dark parts, the lonely parts. He let out a long, shuddering sigh. "Sometimes it feels like I'm wearing a mask, a smile that ain't really mine." Memphis nudged him gently, as if offering comfort. Elvis responded by wrapping an arm around the horse's neck, leaning his forehead against the warm, soft hide. For a moment he just stood there, drawing strength from the animal's quiet presence. "You don't ask for nothing, do you, boy?" he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "No demands, no expectations. Just you honest and true." Sarah watched, mesmerized. The sheer vulnerability in his posture, the raw emotion in his voice was startling. This was the king, the icon stripped bare, finding refuge in the unconditional acceptance of an animal. After a long silence, Elvis finally straightened up. He noticed Sarah, then standing quietly, her presence almost forgotten. He didn't seem surprised or embarrassed. His blue eyes, though still weary, held a newfound depth. "Sorry, Sarah," he said, a faint, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. "Just talking to my therapist here." He gestured to Memphis, who blinked slowly, as if confirming his role. "No need to apologize, sir," Sarah replied, her voice soft. I understand." She truly did, in a way she hadn't before. Her own childhood had been simple, but she knew the comfort a silent animal could offer when human words failed. Elvis looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she felt a genuine connection, not just as employee and employer, but as two people sharing a quiet understanding. Better than most folks, they don't judge, Don't want nothing from you, except a kind hand and a clean stall." He ran his hand down Memphis's face, his gaze lingering. He paused, a troubled look in his eyes. "It gets heavy." He turned back to Memphis. "But these guys," he patted the horse's flank, "they just see you. No titles, no demands, just you. And that's everything." He didn't elaborate, but the unspoken words hung in the air. They were his sanctuary, his anchor, a connection to a simpler, purer truth. Sarah suddenly understood why the care was so obsessive, why no expense was spared. It wasn't just about pampering, it was about protecting a sacred space, a lifeline. Elvis gave Memphis one last affectionate pat, a long, lingering stroke. "Well, I better get back to it," he said, a familiar sigh escaping him. The weariness was still there, but a little lighter now, as if the quiet conversation with Memphis had eased some of the burden. As he walked away, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast stable, Sarah looked at Memphis, then back at the door where Elvis had disappeared. She had witnessed a moment of raw vulnerability, a quiet confession of the heavy price of fame. The horses weren't just Elvis Presley's prized possessions. They were his confidants, his healers, his truest companions in a world that often felt lonely at the top. The why was beginning to reveal itself, not as a grand gesture, but as a profound, deeply personal need. Quiet confessions Sarah had witnessed sparked a deeper curiosity within her. She began to observe Elvis's interactions with his horses with new eyes, seeing not just affection, but a desperate yearning for something he seemed to find only in their presence. She also started listening more closely to the casual conversations of the older staff members, especially Vernon Presley, Elvis's father. One morning, Sarah was helping Hank clean out the feed room, organizing the meticulously labeled bags of grain and supplements. Vernon walked in, sipping a cup of coffee, overseeing their work. "You know," Hank mumbled, wiping sweat from his brow, "Elvis was always like this with animals, even when he was just a little tyke. Never seen a boy so crazy about critters." Vernon nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. "That's true, Hank. Always back in Tupelo. Before all this." He gestured vaguely towards the grandeur of Graceland. "We didn't have much, couldn't afford much more than a roof over our heads and food on the table. Sometimes, barely that." Sarah paused her work, listening intently. She knew Elvis had come from humble beginnings, but she hadn't grasped the true extent of it. "He was a quiet boy, Elvis was," Vernon continued, his voice soft, almost nostalgic. "Always drawn to the animals. We had a few chickens, a scrawny old dog, a mule sometimes if we needed one for the garden. He'd spend hours out there with them, just sitting, talking to him like they were people." Hank chuckled. "Remember that old mongrel he had? Hound dog, he called him. That dog followed him everywhere. Elvis used to share his last piece of bread with that dog, even if he was hungry." A fond smile touching his lips. He understood him, knew they didn't have nothing but instinct and a need for kindness. He always said animals gave you love, plain and simple. Didn't ask for nothing else. Sarah pictured a young, skinny Elvis growing up in poverty, finding solace and unwavering companionship in the eyes of a loyal dog or a quiet mule. Painted a stark contrast to the life he lived now, surrounded by adoring crowds, but also by constant demands and superficiality. "When things got tough," Vernon went on, his voice dropping slightly, "and they often did, people. They could be mean, or they'd leave, or they'd disappoint you, but an animal was always there, always the same, always honest." He sighed. "He saw a lot of folks come and go. Even back then, we moved around a fair bit when I was trying to find work. New schools, new faces, sometimes not very friendly ones. But that old dog, he was a constant." Sarah thought about the constant touring, the relentless schedule, the endless stream of people in Elvis's life. Now fans, managers, hangers-on, public persona, the one that grinned and gyrated. must feel like a performance, a never-ending act. No wonder he craved the simplicity and honesty of animals. When we finally made it, when the record started selling, he never forgot where he came from," Hank added, shaking his head. "Never forgot what it was like to be hungry, or to feel like you didn't belong. He always said he never wanted anything around him to suffer like he had. That's why these horses," Vernon gestured around the luxurious stables, "this isn't just about show. It's about giving them the best of everything, 'cause they deserve it, and because he knows what it's like not to have anything. They're safe here, truly safe." It wasn't just a personal preference for animals. It was a profound empathy born from his own experiences. The lavish care wasn't extravagance. It was a manifestation of a deep-seated desire to protect, to nurture, to give abundance where once there was scarcity. Later that day, as Sarah was leading Domino out to his paddock, Elvis himself appeared, walking slowly across the lawn from the direction of the mansion. He caught her eye and offered a small, tired smile. "Hey, Domino," he murmured, reaching out to stroke the Frisian's nose. Domino whickered softly in response, rubbing his head against Elvis's chest. "He's a handsome boy, isn't he?" Sarah remarked, feeling more comfortable speaking freely with him now. "He is," Elvis agreed, his gaze softening as he looked at the horse. "All heart, you know. When I was a kid, we had an old mule named Molly. She wasn't fancy, wasn't pretty, but she was the kindest creature. Used to let me lean my head on her side. When I was sad, felt like she understood everything." His eyes held a distant, melancholic gleam, as if he was seeing Molly, not Domino. "They just seem to know, don't they?" Sarah said, thinking of her own childhood. Horse Elvis nodded slowly. "They do. They don't need explanations, no big words. Just a quiet presence. They don't care if you're the king or just some poor kid from Tupelo. They just care if you're kind." He paused, then added, "That's a rare thing, Sarah, in this world." Patted Domino one last time, a lingering, almost reverent touch. As he walked away back towards the mansion and the demands of his public life, Sarah felt a wave of profound understanding wash over her. The why wasn't just about luxury or status. It was a deeply personal testament to a childhood marked by poverty, insecurity, and the unwavering, unconditional love he found in the eyes of an animal. These horses weren't just cherished. They were living symbols of a purity and honesty. He clung to a tangible link to a past where animals had been his truest friends. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's understanding of Elvis's connection to his horses deepened. She saw how his visits to the stables were less about checking on his investments and more about finding a sanctuary, a quiet retreat from the relentless demands of his fame. The stables weren't just a part of Graceland. They were a separate world, a haven where the noise of the outside faded and the king could simply be a man. One afternoon, Sarah was working in the tack room, meticulously cleaning and oiling saddles and bridles, the rich scent of leather filling the air. Elvis strolled in, surprisingly quiet, and leaned against the doorframe watching her. He had a pensive look on his face, a slight furrow in his brow that spoke of a mind troubled by unseen pressures. "You really take pride in your work, don't you, Sarah?" he remarked, his voice low. "I do, sir," she replied, buffing a stirrup iron to a shine. "These are beautiful pieces of tack, and they deserve proper care, just like the horses." Elvis nodded slowly. "They do everything here deserves the best, especially the horses." He pushed off the doorframe and walked over to a rack of halters, running a hand over the soft leather of a show halter. "You know, people often ask me why I spend so much on these animals. Why? They've got the best vets, the finest feed, the grandest stables." Sarah paused, waiting. This was it. The direct answer. "And what do you tell them, sir?" she asked, her voice soft. Turned, his blue eyes meeting hers, serious and searching. "Some folks, they think it's just about money, about showing off, and I suppose some of it is on the surface, but that's not the real reason, not the heart of it." He looked away, his gaze sweeping over the polished tack room as if gathering his thoughts. This life, he began, gesturing vaguely around him, encompassing Graceland and everything beyond. It's a blessing, no doubt. I thank God every day for what I have. But it's also a cage sometimes. Sarah listened intently, her heart aching slightly for the man who seemingly had everything, yet spoke of cages. Everywhere I go. I'm Elvis Presley, the king, he continued, his voice tinged with a weariness she recognized from their earlier conversation. I walk into a room and people see the gold lame, the curled lip, the records they bought. They see what they want to see, what they expect. They don't see the real me. They don't know who that even is anymore. Sometimes I don't know. He ran a hand through his famously coiffed hair. A gesture of quiet frustration. And the demands, the endless demands from the studio, the colonel, the fans, the family, the hangers-on. Every wants something, a piece, a picture, an autograph, to be the myth. Turned back to Sarah, his eyes holding a profound sadness. But when I come out here, he swept a hand around the stables. To Memphis, to Rising Sun, to Domino. They don't know about the records. They don't care about the crowds. They don't judge me. They don't want anything from me, except kindness. A gentle touch, a quiet word. His voice grew softer, more intimate, as if revealing a sacred truth. They don't care if I mess up a lyric, or if I'm tired, or if I'm feeling low. They just accept me, unconditionally. They offer a truth that's so hard to find out there. Paused, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. They remind me who I am, the boy from Tupelo, who just loved animals, who loved simple things. He leaned against a saddle stand, his posture a picture of quiet exhaustion. The world can get awfully noisy, Sarah, full of lies and expectations, but a horse is honest. Their eyes don't lie, their reactions don't lie. They're pure, and that purity, that's something I don't get much of anymore. He looked at Sarah, a faint, almost wistful smile on his lips. So when I make sure these horses have the best of everything, it's not just for them. It's for me too. It's about creating a little piece of honest truth in a world that often feels very unreal, that about giving back to the only creatures that have ever offered me love without conditions. He straightened up, the weariness still etched on his face, but his eyes held a glimmer of peace. They are my anchor, Sarah, my grounding. Without them, I think I'd get lost sometimes. Completely lost. He didn't say anything more. He just nodded, a silent communication of the weight he carried and the solace he found. He walked out of the tack room as quietly as he had entered, leaving Sarah amidst the scent of leather and the lingering echo of his words. She stood there absorbing his confession. It wasn't about money or status, it was about survival. These horses weren't just animals. They were living embodiments of unconditional love, purity, and honesty. The very things Elvis Presley, the most famous man in the world, seemed to crave most desperately in his extraordinary. The puzzle pieces of the why were finally clicking into place, revealing a portrait of a man far more vulnerable and complex than the public persona suggested. Conversation in the tack room had been a turning point for Sarah. She no longer saw Elvis's obsessive care for his horses as merely an eccentric celebrity's indulgence, but as a profound necessity for his emotional well-being. She now understood that the stables were more than just a place where horses lived. They were Elvis's sanctuary, a quiet refuge where he could shed the heavy mantle of the king. Over the next few weeks, the public pressures on Elvis seemed to intensify. News reports hinted at grueling recording sessions, demanding film shoots, and the relentless planning for new tours. Sarah noticed the change in Elvis's demeanor whenever he came to the stables. His visits became more frequent, but also more urgent, as if he was seeking out the horses as a lifeline. One particularly harsh week, the entire Graceland staff seemed to be on edge. Whispers of arguments missed, deadlines, and a general air of exhaustion hung over the mansion. Elvis looked drawn and pale, his famous energy visibly depleted. He moved slower, and his usual charming banter was replaced by a quiet intensity. One evening, well after dark, Sarah was finishing up some late-night checks, making sure all the horses were settled. She heard soft sounds coming from Memphis's stall, a low murmur, almost a groan. Curiosity piqued. She approached cautiously. Through the dim lights, she saw Elvis. He was sitting on a bale of hay in Memphis's stall, his back against the horse's warm flank. His head was bowed, buried in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking slightly. "Memphis ever?" The gentle giant stood patiently, occasionally nudging him with his nose, as if trying to offer comfort. Sarah's heart twisted. This wasn't just weariness. This was profound sorrow. This was the king of rock and roll, utterly broken and vulnerable, finding solace in the silent company of a horse. She hesitated, unsure whether to retreat or to offer some quiet support, but Elvis suddenly looked up, sensing her presence. His eyes were bloodshot, and she could see the glistening tracks of tears on his cheeks. He looked utterly exposed, but not ashamed. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice rough with emotion. "Didn't expect anyone to be here." "Just finishing up, sir," she said softly, stepping cautiously into the stall. "Are you all right?" It was a foolish question, but it was all she could think to say. He shook his head, a heavy sigh escaping him. "No, Sarah, I ain't all right. Not tonight sometimes. Sometimes it just gets too much." He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a few strands that fell across his forehead. "The weight of it all, it just crushes you." He leaned back against Memphis, who shifted his weight slightly, settling closer to him. "They want more, always more. Another song, another movie, another tour. They don't care if you're tired, don't care if you're hurting. Just keep smiling, keep performing, keep being Elvis." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I feel like I'm losing myself, Sarah. Like the real me is just fading away. The boy from Tupelo, he's somewhere in there, but it's hard to find him." He looked up at Memphis, stroking the horse's neck. "But not here. Here with them I can breathe, I can be me. They don't ask for anything but what I have to give, and that's pure, honest love, and they give it back tenfold." Tears welled in his eyes again, and this time he didn't try to hide them. "This fame, it gives you everything, and it takes everything. You're never really alone, but you're always lonely." Sarah found herself sitting down beside him on the hay bale, not knowing what to say, but simply offering a quiet, non-judgmental presence. She understood what he meant by loneliness, even if she couldn't comprehend the scale of his isolation. In a world of millions of screaming fans, he found true connection only in the silent acceptance of his horses. "They just listen, don't they?" she murmured, recalling her own childhood moments in the barn. Elvis nodded, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "Yeah, they listen. And they don't judge, never judge, just pure, clean love. It's the only real thing I got left sometimes, Sarah." He leaned his head back against Memphis's warm flank, closing his eyes. Sarah sat beside him, watching the silent communion between man and horse. Memphis occasionally nudged Elvis gently, nuzzling his head, a silent offer of comfort. The simple act spoke volumes. The grand mansion, the roaring crowds, the millions of dollars, none of it could buy this pure, unburdened connection. This was why the horses were treated like royalty. They were not just animals. They were the pillars of Elvis Presley's sanity, the quiet keepers of his troubled soul, the last bastion of unconditioned love in a life. Consumed by conditions and expectation, he looked calmer, the raw anguish in his face replaced by a deep, melancholic peace. He stood up, carefully giving Memphis a final pat. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice stronger now, though still hoarse, for being here." He didn't elaborate, but the gratitude in his eyes was palpable. He trusted her with his vulnerability. He walked out of the stall, leaving Sarah with the lingering warmth of Memphis's body and the profound weight of Elvis's hidden sorrow. The king might wear the crown, but here in the quiet of the stables he found his true reign, a kingdom of unconditional love, guarded by the silent, loyal hearts of his horses. And Sarah, an ordinary girl from Kentucky, was now a witness to this extraordinary truth. After that night, a new layer of understanding settled between Sarah and Elvis. Their interactions remained professional, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement, a shared secret of his vulnerability and the profound role the horses played in his life. Sarah felt a deep empathy for him, recognizing the immense pressure he lived under and how vital these animals were to his spirit. She also found herself drawn deeper into the quiet world of the stables, no longer just a caretaker, but a participant in this unique ecosystem of healing and solace. She spent more time with the horses outside of her official duties, simply sitting with them, stroking their coats, absorbing their calm presence. She began to understand on a more personal level the peace Elvis found there. One crisp afternoon, a new challenge arose. Rising Sun, the elegant Arabian, usually so cooperative, was unusually agitated. He pranced nervously in his stall, tossing his head, and refused to let anyone near his left foreleg. The vet, Dr. Miller, had examined him earlier, finding no obvious injury but noting a tenderness. He was restless and clearly uncomfortable. Elvis arrived, looking concerned, having been informed of Rising Sun's distress. He watched as Hank tried to soothe the horse, but Rising Sun remained wary, his eyes rolling. "He won't let anyone touch it, Elvis," Hank explained, frustrated. "Usually he's so gentle." Elvis nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the beautiful Arabian. He walked calmly into the stall, speaking in his low, soothing voice. "Hey, pretty boy. What's wrong, you hurting fella?" He gently extended a hand, but Rising Sun shied away, lifting his leg nervously. Elvis sighed, a familiar weariness washing over his face. "He's stressed. He trusts us, but something's making him anxious." He turned to Dr. Miller. "Any ideas on how to get him to relax? We can't help him if he won't let us near the leg." Dr. Miller shook her head. "He needs to calm down, maybe a mild sedative, but I'd rather avoid that if we can. It affects their awareness." Suddenly, Sarah had an idea. She remembered a trick her grandmother used to use on skittish animals, humming a particular lullaby. It sounded silly, but she'd seen it work wonders on nervous calves and injured dogs. She approached cautiously. "Mr. Presley, Dr. Miller, if I might try something," she offered, her voice a little hesitant. Elvis looked at her, his brows raised in surprise. "What do you have in mind, Sarah?" It's a bit old-fashioned," she admitted, "but sometimes a specific tune, a quiet song, can soothe them. My grandmother used to sing to our animals when they were frightened." Elvis considered her. For a moment, his gaze sharp. Then a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even desperation, crossed his face. "All right, Sarah, go ahead. Anything that might help him." She moved slowly into the stall, making no sudden movements. Rising Sun eyed her warily, his ears swiveling. She kept her distance at first, then slowly, carefully began to hum. It was a simple old Appalachian lullaby, one her grandmother had sung to her as a child. Her voice was soft, melodic, carrying a gentle rhythmic hum. At first, Rising Sun remained agitated, his tail swishing nervously. But as Sarah continued to hum, her voice unwavering, a subtle change began. His ears stopped twitching quite so wildly, his eyes, though still wide, seemed to focus on her. The prancing lessened. Sarah slowly moved closer, still humming. She extended a hand palm open and gently laid it on his neck. Rising Sun flinched, but he didn't pull away completely. She continued to hum her touch, light and reassuring. Gradually, the tension in his powerful body began to melt away. He lowered his head, nudging her hand, and then surprisingly leaned into her touch. Elvis, Dr. Miller, and Hank watched in stunned silence. Rising Sun, who had resisted them all, was now standing calmly, accepting Sarah's gentle touch and the soft, continuous hum. "Now," Sarah whispered, still humming, "Let's see that leg, pretty boy." She slowly, ever so slowly, slid her hand down his leg. Her movements deliberate and calm, all the while maintaining the soft hum. Rising Sun remained still, his eyes half closed. Dr. Miller, seeing her opportunity, quietly stepped forward. "Remarkable, Sarah," she murmured, then began her own gentle examination of the leg. This time, Rising Sun allowed her to probe, only flinching slightly when she found the tender spot. "Ah, there it is," Dr. Miller said, her voice low. "Looks like a minor stone bruise. Nothing serious, but definitely painful. Good job, Sarah. You calmed him down perfectly." Elvis let out a long, relieved sigh. He stepped into the stall and laid a hand on Rising Sun's neck, his gaze fixed on Sarah. That was something, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with awe. "How did you know?" "My grandmother always said animals respond to kindness and consistency," Sarah replied, a little breathless from the tension. "And sometimes a familiar sound can just anchor them." Elvis looked at her, a profound understanding dawning in his eyes. He wasn't just seeing a stablehand anymore. He was seeing someone who intuitively understood the power of simple, unconditional comfort. He understood that she, like him, connected with these animals on a soul deep level. "That's it, isn't it?" he said more to himself than to her. "Anchors. There are anchors." He gave a quiet, knowing nod. In that moment, a bond formed not just of shared work, but of shared spirit. Sarah didn't just understand his why, intellectually. She had experienced it, confirmed it, becoming a part of the quiet, healing world he had built around his beloved horses. The incident with Rising Sun solidified Sarah's place within Elvis's inner circle of trust regarding his horses. She was no longer just a new stablehand, she was someone who intuitively understood the animals, and by extension, Elvis himself. He began to seek her out more often in the stables, not always for conversation, but sometimes just for her quiet presence. A shared understanding hanging unspoken between them. One blustery evening, a storm was brewing over Memphis. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the stable doors, and the horses were restless, sensing the coming shift in weather. Sarah was on late duty ensuring extra hay was out and checking the locks. Elvis surprisingly was there too, walking the aisles, a deep frown on his face. He seemed particularly troubled tonight, his famous intensity magnified by an unspoken sorrow. He stopped at the stall of a mare named Dolly, a sweet quarter horse running a hand over her soft nose. Sarah watched him from a distance, respecting his need for space, but his distress was almost palpable. After a long moment, Elvis sighed deeply and turned to her. "Sarah," he said, his voice unusually strained, "come here for a moment." His eyes, usually so vibrant, were shadowed with a profound sadness she hadn't seen before. "The storm," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It reminds me of other storms from a long time ago." He paused, his gaze distant, lost in memory. "You know I had a twin brother, don't you?" Sarah nodded. She knew the basic facts of his life, his humble beginnings, the death of his twin at birth. It was a well-known, tragic part of his story, but she'd never heard him speak of it personally. "Jesse Garin," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Born just before me, stillborn." He looked at Dolly, then back at Sarah, a raw vulnerability in his eyes. "Always felt like a part of me was missing, like I was meant to have a companion, a counterpart. And he was gone before he ever took a breath." He leaned against Dolly's stall door, his posture heavy with a grief that felt timeless. "My mama, she grieved for him every single day, and I always felt his presence a quiet shadow, a constant longing." He ran a hand over Dolly's forehead, his touch reverent. "They just listened. They gave me comfort when I didn't know how to ask for it." He swallowed hard, his voice dropping lower. "In a world where I always felt like I had to be strong to be the one, These animals, they let me be weak. They let me hurt. They loved me without judgment, without expectations. They filled a space that nothing else could touch. They don't care about the boy who lost his brother, who lost his mama, who just wants to feel loved, plain and simple. He looked directly at Sarah, his blue eyes intense and brimming with unshed tears. These horses, Sarah, they are my connection to that pure, unconditional love. They are my anchors to a time when things were simpler. When love didn't come with a price tag, they remind me of Mama's kindness, of Jesse's unspoken presence. They're innocent. They're honest. When I see them thriving, healthy, safe, it's like I'm giving back to them. Yes, but also to that little boy inside me. To Mama, to Jesse. I want them to have everything I never had. Every comfort, every bit of love, because they represent that pure, honest love that saved me, and they continue to save me every single day. He was quiet then, the confession hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken grief and profound love. The wind howled outside, mirroring the storm within him, yet here in the quiet of Dolly's stall, there was a profound peace. Sarah didn't know what to say. She simply reached out a hand, mirroring Elvis's earlier gesture, and gently stroked Dolly's soft muzzle. The horse responded with a soft sigh, pressing into her touch. Elvis watched her, a faint, sad smile on his face. "You understand Presley," she whispered, her own eyes misting. "I think I do. They're more than just horses, they're family, they're home." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "They are. They truly are." He turned back to Dolly, leaning his forehead against her neck, finding solace in her warm, unwavering presence. The king, stripped bare of his crown and charisma, was simply a man finding healing in the eyes of his equine family, a tangible link to the love he cherished and the innocence he had lost. The reason why his horses were treated better than some people was not just touching, it was heartbreakingly, beautifully human. The storm outside raged through the night, mirroring the emotional revelations Sarah had witnessed in the stable. But by morning, the skies had cleared, leaving behind a crisp, clean air and a sense of calm. Sarah went about her duties, but with a new depth of understanding that colored every action. Care of these horses was no longer just a job. It was a sacred trust, a stewardship of Elvis's profound love and his quiet, enduring pain. She understood now why no expense was too great, no detail too small. The elaborate stables, the meticulous diets, the constant veterinary care, it was all a tangible expression of a love born from childhood poverty and loneliness, amplified by the isolating demands of fame. These horses were the living embodiment of unconditional love, a purity Elvis had found so rarely in his tumultuous life. They were his connection to a lost past, to his beloved mother, and to the twin brother he had never known. They were his grounding, his therapy, his truest companions. Sarah watched Elvis arrive at the stables that morning, looking tired, but somehow lighter than the night before. He didn't avoid her gaze. Instead, he offered a small, appreciative nod. There was an unspoken connection between them, a shared understanding of the profound vulnerability he had revealed. He walked among the horses, his touch lingering, his murmured words soft and intimate. He ran his hand over Memphis's powerful shoulder-ruffled, rising sun's mane, and gently scratched Dolly behind the ears. It was clear that the stables were more than just a place of comfort. They were his anchor, a constant amidst the chaos of his life. Later that day, as Sarah was leading Domino out for his exercise, Elvis approached her. He had a calmer, more frittef bell. It's more than just care, isn't it? It's understanding, it's heart. And you got a big one, Sarah. He paused, looking out at the sun-drenched paddocks, where his horses grazed peacefully. You know, when I think about all of this, he gestured to the sprawling estate, the life he had built, the music, the movies, the crowds. It's all so big, so loud. But the real joy, the real peace, I find it right here with them. They ask nothing, but give everything. Sarah finished, echoing his own words from weeks before. Elvis looked at her, his eyes shining with shared insight. Exactly, and that's a rare and precious thing in this world. It's what keeps me true. He spoke then about his hopes for the horses, for their future. He wanted them to always be cared for long after he was gone. He spoke about how their spirit, their unwavering loyalty, was something he hoped people would remember about him too, beyond the dazzling stage lights and the controversies. They're a testament, he said, his voice full of quiet conviction, a testament to what true love looks like, to loyalty, to purity, and I truly hope that people will see that. See them and understand. Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She saw it. She understood. The horses were not just a hobby or a luxury. They were Elvis's legacy of love, a silent, powerful statement about the man behind the legend. As the years passed, Sarah remained at Graceland a dedicated stablehand, and later a trusted stable manager. She witnessed the ebb and flow of Elvis's life, his triumphs and his struggles. And through it all, she saw his unwavering devotion to his horses, a constant in a world of change. She became a guardian of their welfare, but also a quiet keeper of Elvis's true heart, a heart so big it sought solace and reflection in the pure, unconditional love of his animals. After Elvis's passing, Graceland opened to the public, and the stables remained an integral part of the experience. Visitors would walk through, marveling at the pristine environment, the magnificent horses. They often commented on the extraordinary care, echoing the old rumors. They say he treated them better than some people. And Sarah, now older, with wisdom etched into her face, would watch them, a knowing smile playing on her lips. She understood the deeper truth behind the whispers. It wasn't about excess or showing off. It was about a vulnerable man, a lonely king, who found in the honest eyes of a horse the unconditional love, purity, and peace that a demanding world rarely offered. The horses of Graceland stood as a living monument, not just to Elvis Presley's fame, but to his profound humanity, a heartwarming testament to the touching reason why he loved them so fiercely. They were his anchors, his healers, and the quiet keepers of his soul, a legacy of love that continued to whisper through the hallowed grounds of Graceland.